Hey everyone, this is my first video and I want to jump straight into something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. If you enjoy it, feel free to like and subscribe, but for now, let's get right into it. Is Xbox actually less relevant than ever, or have we just been told that it is? Because if you've been paying attention, there's a pattern in how Xbox is talked about, and it doesn't feel organic. It feels pre-decided. Before games even launch, the tone is already set, the verdict is already leaning negative, and at some point, you have to ask yourself, are we forming opinions, or are we inheriting them? Because right now it feels like the conclusion comes first, and the analysis comes later. This is what I call the Xbox tax. It's not official, but you can feel it. Games on Xbox get judged faster, harsher, and with less patience. Then those same games reach a wider audience. Suddenly the tone softens. They're underrated. They're worth revisiting. They're better than expected. It's the same game, different platform, different verdict. And once you notice that pattern, it's hard to unsee it because it keeps happening. When Polygon tweeted, "Is Xbox less relevant now than it ever has been?" that wasn't a thoughtful discussion, it was framing. There wasn't even an article attached, just a loaded question designed to steer the conversation, and when Stein called it out, questioning the lack of substance, the tweet quietly disappeared. But that moment says a lot about the current landscape. This isn't analysis, it's narrative building, not criticism conditioning. And once that tone is set, everything that follows starts leaning in the same direction. Take Starfield. The conversation was dominated by what it wasn't. Not groundbreaking enough, not modern enough, not meeting impossible expectations. But over time, as more people played it and it released on PlayStation, the tone shifted. People started appreciating the scale, the system, the freedom. The game didn't fundamentally change, the perception did. It didn't get better overnight magically. People just stopped trying to tear it down, and that's the Xbox tax in motion. Harsh launch narrative, delayed appreciation. And now we can look at maybe the best example, Sea of Thieves. With Sea of Thieves, the turnaround is impossible to ignore. At launch, it was called empty and lacking, and people were even saying that Microsoft was killing Rare, that they should make Banjo, that they should make Conquer. And yeah, it did need more content. But Rare kept building, expanding, improving. Years later, especially when the audience on PlayStation, it's praised as a unique, evolving sandbox. It didn't suddenly become great, people just finally let it be great. And that shift didn't happen because the game changed overnight, it happened because the narrative did. And let's take a step back and look at the pattern. Titanfall launched and got hit hard for not having a traditional campaign, which sure, it is fair criticism. But what it did have was one of the most innovative multiplayer experiences of its time. It was fast, it was fluid, and it was ahead of the curve. And yet, it was written off pretty quickly. Then Titanfall 2 comes along, it launches on more platforms, it reaches a wider audience, and suddenly, it's this masterpiece, a cult classic. It's one of the best shooters ever made. And here's the thing, Titanfall 2 is incredible. The campaign deserves every single bit of praise it gets. But was the original Titanfall really that far off? Or did it just not get the same level of patience and the same audience? You start to see the pattern elsewhere also. Quantum Break tried something genuinely different. It was a mix of cinematic storytelling, live action TV elements, and gameplay built around time manipulation. It didn't all land, but it was ambitious. Then Control comes out, it refines those ideas, focuses the design, launches everywhere, and now it's seen as a masterpiece. It's the same studio, the same creative DNA, completely different reception. Or we can look at Sunset Overdrive. It introduced reverse-on combat systems that felt fresh, fast, and genuinely fun in a way most games weren't doing at the time. It took risks, it had personality. Then for a few years later, Spider-Man builds on that kind of movement, and with a bigger budget and obviously a globally recognised IP, and suddenly it's universally praised. And again, Spider-Man deserves that praise, no question, it is an amazing game, but does Sunset Overdrive really deserve to be overlooked? Because at a certain point it stops feeling like coincidence. It starts to feel like Xbox games are judged at their roughest edges, while similar ideas, when refined and released to a broader audience, are judged at their best. So when an Xbox exclusive game comes out, it's picked apart, its flaws amplified, its risks criticised, and the narrative becomes "this is disappointing." But when those same ideas evolve, improve, and show up somewhere else, suddenly they're celebrated. And it makes you wonder, were those earlier games actually that flawed, or were they just judged more harshly from the start? I said Sea of Thieves was probably the best example, but this is maybe the problem that I'm trying to get across, but this is another good example, and these good examples keep popping up. This one is Scalebound. Before it was cancelled, the reaction was mixed. People questioned its directions, its visuals, whether it would even deliver, whether the gameplay looked fun, it was janky, basically everything you could criticise about a game was wrong with it. But the moment it got cancelled, suddenly it was this lost masterpiece. You didn't love it then, you just love blaming Xbox now, and that's the pattern. The value of something increases the moment it becomes a criticism point. Rise of the Tomb Raider is a perfect example of how the conversation can shift. When it launched, it wasn't treated as a game, it became part of a larger debate. The focus quickly moved away from what it actually was, a polished, content-rich, critically strong experience, and towards where it was available. The exclusivity became the headline, and the game itself felt almost secondary in the discussion. And because of that, the reception carried a different tone, more scepticism, more hesitation, more focus on what people couldn't play it on rather than what it actually delivered. Which is strange because if you look at the game on its own terms, it stands as one of the strongest action-adventure titles of its generation. But the way it was talked about didn't always reflect that, and that's what keeps coming up again and again. The idea that the content around Xbox releases seems to shape the narrative before the game even has a chance to speak for itself. And now we can look at Avowed. You can see the narrative forming in real time, early impressions being sceptical, uncertain identity, unclear direction, but as it reaches a wider audience on PlayStation, the tone becomes more positive, more inviting. Suddenly it's a fun RPG worth trying. The game didn't change, the conversation caught up, and that gap between perception and reality keeps happening with Xbox titles. Even technical voices aren't immune to this pressure. Digital Foundry praised advancements on DLSS5 tech, but after the community backlash, the founder of Digital Foundry, Richard Ledbetter, suggested that they might have approached it differently if they had known the reaction it would get. I'll show this clip here because it is important to hear it directly.
I'm going to kick off first of all by holding my hand up and saying that, yeah, we understand a lot of the feedback to the video, and I don't think we did a good enough job on the day. We had a lot to say, not a lot of time to say it, and we went straight from seeing the demos into making the video. And yeah, beyond that, hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? But we should have taken more time with the material. And I think it would have been prudent to wait to see the reaction from the audience and the developers to the keynote. And yeah, audience and developers, both super important to what we do. Opinion is clearly divided on this one, but looking over social media, it's been interesting to see varying opinions from both sides of the argument, audience and developers alike. Even so, lessons learned.
And I found that hilarious. When I first heard about it, I just could not stop laughing. And I think this is a problem with the media and the community against Xbox. It's when opinions start adjusting to avoid the backlash. That's not analysis, that's survival. And if that pressure exists in tech analysis, imagine how much it shapes the general Xbox discourse where negativity is often the first aftertake. And you can see that same tone in smaller moments too, like when journalists interact with Xbox features directly. Destin Laguirre recently posted about issues he was having while using a Windows preview build and the Xbox Insider environment programs that are explicitly labelled as unfinished, experimental and prone to bugs. That's the whole point. But instead of framing it as this is early software, something's not quite working as expected, the tone shifts into sarcasm. It just works, not bad, like it's some kind of failure rather than a known limitation of the program. And that matters because tone shapes perception. It's completely fair to ask for help or point out issues, but present expecting better instability as a punchline feeds into the same negative framing. If you're opting into an insider program, you're opting into instability. That's not a flaw, that's the deal. So when even well-respected voices blur that line, intentionally or not, it reinforces the idea that something is wrong with Xbox, when in reality it's just unfinished software behaving exactly the way it's supposed to. And this doesn't just apply to games, it extends to strategy as well. When Sony brings its games to PC, it's framed as smart, calculated, forward-thinking, expanding the audience without hurting the core brand. But when Microsoft does the same thing, or goes even further by putting its games onto PlayStation, it's suddenly labelled as desperation, like Xbox has given up. Then when it's leaked that PlayStation might pull games from PC, it's called genius. But at the moment Xbox is rumoured to bring back exclusives, suddenly they're a dead brand, supposedly unable to survive without PlayStation money, which we'll get into in a second. It's the same strategy, completely different headlines. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough: the results don't even justify the narrative. Yes, there are exceptions. Big names like Forza Horizon 5, Call of Duty, those games will always sell. But when you look beyond that, the numbers are far more modest. The numbers are on the screen so you can see this more clearly, but Ninja Gaiden 4, 257,000, Flight Simulator, 245,000, The Outer Worlds 2, 160,000, Starfield, 140,000, Avowed, 54,000, Age of Empires 4, 52,000, South of Midnight, 16,000. Titles like Avowed, Starfield, Age of Empires, they're not exactly dominant on PlayStation. Even larger releases like Flight Simulator or The Outer Worlds 2 aren't moving in a way that justifies completely changing your platform strategy. So what's the trade-off? Because if revenue isn't massive, but your exclusives are no longer exclusive, then what you're really giving up is identity. You're not just selling games, you're weakening what Xbox stands for, and that's the part people overlook. Because brand matters, platform identity matters. The reason exclusives hit differently is because they define where you play, and when everywhere is everywhere, when everything is everywhere, that connection starts to fade. So while this gets framed as Xbox adapting, there's a real argument that is slowly eroding the very thing that made it distinct in the first place. Short-term reach can cause long-term relevance. And now we're going to move on to Project Helix. I think this is something everyone's been waiting for. So now you've got Project Helix, where the conversation isn't about what it is, it's about trying to make it sound confusing. Is it an Xbox? Is it a PC? Suddenly everyone's acting like this is some sort of impossible concept to understand. But we've all seen this before. The Nintendo Switch launched as a hybrid console and handheld. Nobody sat there pretending they didn't get it. The PlayStation 1 could play CDs, the PlayStation 3 could play Blu-rays. Some people even bought them purely because of that. But nobody questions whether they were still consoles or whether they were DVD players. But now when it's Xbox, it's confusing. And the whole, if it runs Windows, it's a PC. That argument doesn't hold up either. Xbox has always been tied to Windows. Even the original Xbox and Xbox 360, they ran a stripped down version of Windows. The Xbox One has basically been running Windows, more or less. It's been running Windows based architecture for years. At one point, it was literally supporting UWP apps, basically native Windows apps, technically, and nobody suddenly said, oh well, that's not a console anymore. And shout out to Sneakers from NeoGAF, who apparently still thinks that's the case, while you also claiming Project Helix would be cancelled with mass layoffs in early 2026. Funny how the leaks are always negative. And that's the pattern again: confuse the message, question the identity, push the uncertainty, because uncertainty feeds negativity. And it's the same thing we saw with the LSS5 coverage, where the safe option is the popular one, not necessarily the honest one. So you have to ask, are people actually confused about what Helix is, or is the confusion just a narrative being sold? Because here's the punchline: it's only confusing when it's the Xbox. This isn't about pretending Xbox is perfect. It's not. It's made mistakes and it'll make more. But the constant one-sided negativity isn't helping anyone, and neither is ignoring the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about games, it's about perception. And right now, Xbox isn't just fighting competition, it's fighting a narrative. A narrative where its games are judged harder, its successes are questioned more, and its strategies are framed differently, no matter what it does. But here's the reality: the industry needs the Xbox to be strong. Competition drives better games, better services and better value. And when one side gets written off, whether fairly or not, you don't get a better industry, you get a quieter one. And if Xbox keeps getting pushed into a position where its identity doesn't matter anymore, where its games are everywhere but its platform moves less and less, then we lose something bigger than just competition. we lose what makes platforms feel distinct in the first place. So yes, criticise Xbox when it gets things wrong. That's fair, that's necessary. But don't just default to dismissing it. Don't fall into the habit of repeating the same narrative just because it's the easiest one to agree with. So, as I said, is Xbox less relevant, or are we just being told that it is? Because in the end, a weaker Xbox doesn't make PlayStation stronger, it makes gaming smaller. And remember guys, if you liked my video, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and if you want, leave a comment down below. Thank you.